بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أكرم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. We're moving into the second lecture now in our series of considerations of what Imam al-Ghazali is saying about the mysteries of human intentionality, and the fancy philosophical take on the discussion, and it is a big issue in modern philosophy and philosophy of mind as well, where he talks about this in the Ihya Ulumuddin, Revival of the Religious Sciences, in the 37th book, which he entitles Kitab al-Niyya wal-Ikhlas wal-Sidq, the book of intention and sincerity and truthfulness. And we're going through these in turn, and last time we looked at the first 2.5 chapters, or sections of the first chapter, I should say, where the Imam tries to grapple with the deep paradox of this issue of what we mean by the things we do. We saw that Islam is not a religion of legalism. Actions are by intentions. This is the first hadith of Islam. And it is through the qalb salim, the sound heart, that we win God's favour in the next world. We are to be people of open-heartedness and of love who purpose good things. But we also saw that because this is to do with the mystery of consciousness itself, it's a very difficult and slippery animal to try and grab to determine exactly what an intention is. He's given us his definition. But then we saw that he went on to explain that there are subdivisions of intention depending on what our intentions comprise, because it's very unusual for us just to have one reason for doing something. There's always something else going on as well. So we're going to continue in this analytical vein and see what the Imam has to say now in the fourth bayan, the fourth of the 5 expositions in this section on Niyya, which he entitles Bayanu Tafsil al-A'mal al-Muta'alliqati bin-Niyya, an exposition which details different actions insofar as they relate to intention, and is going to differentiate them into the 3 large categories of sins, good deeds, and actions that are in themselves neutral. اعلم أن الأعمال وإن انقسمت أقساما كثيرة. You should know that human actions, even though they can be subdivided and categorized in so many different ways, من فعل وقول وحركة وسكون وجلب ودفع وفكر وذكر, subdivided into actions and words, or things we do and things we abstain from doing, things we get and things we deflect, thoughts, invocations, وغير ذلك مما لا يتصور إحصاؤه واستقصاؤه, and other categories of human actions which one could never imagine actually putting a limit to them. There's just so many different types of actions that human beings can do and ways in which we can categorize them. فهي ثلاثة أقسام. They are essentially 3 types. معاصٍ وطاعات ومباحات. Sins, good deeds, neutral deeds, or to be more literal, act of disobedience, acts of obedience, and things which are in themselves merely permissible. القسم الأول المعاصي. Section 1, act of disobedience. وهي لا تتغير عن موضوعاتها بالنية. These cannot depart from their category through intention. فلا ينبغي أن يفهم الجاهل ذلك من عموم قوله عليه الصلاة والسلام إنما الأعمال بالنيات. Let the ignorant person not assume otherwise, simply on the basis of the apparent general meaning of the Holy Prophet's statement, actions are by intentions. This is not a hadith to be read literally. Very few hadiths are. فيظن, so this ignorant person supposes أن المعصية تنقلب طاعة بالنية. So the ignorant person supposes that a sin can turn into a virtue simply by changing one's intention. كالذي يغتاب إنسانا مراعاة لقلب غيره. Like somebody who slanders somebody in order to make somebody else's heart happy. So you're sitting at a dinner and you're talking about so-and-so and you really lay into him and say ugly things. Why? Because you want to make somebody there cheer up because they have a poor opinion of that person. So you lay into somebody's employer just to please the employee who's just been sacked. Just changing the intention does not mean that that is no longer a form of backbiting. أو يطعم فقيرا من مال غيره. Similarly, to feed a poor person with money that belongs to somebody else. أو يبني مدرسة أو مسجدا أو رباطا من مال حرام وقصده الخير. Similarly, you can't build a madrasa or a mosque or a Sufi gathering place from haram money just because you're intending to do something good. فهذا كله جهل. All of that is ignorance. والنية لا تؤثر في إخراجه عن كونه ظلما وعدوانا ومعصية. Just the intention cannot take those things out of the category of injustice and usurpation and sin. بل قصده الخير بالشر على خلاف مقتضى الشرع شر آخر. In fact, by trying to turn something evil into something good just by having some intention introduces another evil. It multiplies the evil and doesn't transform it. فإن عرفه فهو معاند للشرع. If he knows that that thing is sinful, then he is being deliberately hostile to the divine revealed law. وإن جهله, if he doesn't know, فهو عاص بجهله. He is sinful because he is ignorant. He should have learned. إذ طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم, because seeking knowledge is an obligation for every Muslim. والخيرات إنما عرف كونها خيرات بالشرع. Good deeds are only known for sure to be good deeds because they are specified as such in revelation. فكيف يمكن أن يكون الشر خيرا? So how is it that something bad that we know is bad because God has said it's bad, how could it ever become something positive? Hayhat. Ridiculous. بل المروج لذلك على القلب خفي الشهوة وباطن الهوى. That which makes the heart inclined to this is hidden desire and surreptitious whim. فإن القلب إذا كان مائلا إلى طلب الجاه, because the heart, when it by its nature inclines towards seeking status, واستمالة قلوب الناس, and to get other people's hearts to incline towards us, وسائر حظوظ النفس, and the other things that the nafs craves, توسل الشيطان به إلى التلبيس على الجاهل. The shaitan uses this in order to confuse and disrupt the religious life of the ignorant person. ولذلك قال سهل رحمه الله تعالى, and for this reason Sahl Tustari said, may Allah have mercy on him, ما أصي الله تعالى بمعصية أعظم من الجهل. Allah is never disobeyed with anything more terrible than ignorance. قيل يا أبا محمد, it was said to him, oh Abu Muhammad, هل تعرف شيئا أشد من الجهل? Do you know anything that's worse than ignorance? قال نعم الجهل بالجهل. Yes, the one thing that's worse than being ignorant is not to know that you're ignorant. So you go through your religious life with no idea that you don't know about so many things, and falling into pitfalls all the time. You're just ignorant of your own ignorance. وهو كما قال, and it's exactly so. لأن الجهل بالجهل يصد بالكلية باب التعلم. Because being ignorant of one's own ignorance closes completely the door of learning. فمن يظن بالكلية بنفسه أنه عالم فكيف يتعلم. Somebody who thinks that he knows, how could he ever seek knowledge? So by being ignorant of your own ignorance, you make it impossible for you really to be a student. Knowing that you're ignorant is the first step in the path of sacred knowledge. وكذلك أفضل ما أطيع الله تعالى به العلم. Similarly, the noblest thing by which God is obeyed is knowledge. ورأس العلم العلم بالعلم. And the head or the summit of knowledge is knowing about knowledge. كما أن رأس الجهل الجهل بالجهل. Just as the head of all ignorance is being ignorant of one's ignorance. فإن من لا يعلم العلم النافع من العلم الضار اشتغل بما أكب الناس عليه من العلوم المزخرفة التي هي وسائلهم إلى الدنيا وذلك هو مادة الجهل ومنبع فساد العالم. Because the person who can't distinguish useful knowledge from harmful knowledge and is preoccupied with that which people are preoccupied with by way of fancy sciences, complex forms of the study of Arabic rhetoric and poetry and the details, kind of useless, futile details of grammar that could never really be effective. These are people who are using these knowledges as means to acquire things in dunya, jobs, status, repute, respect. وذلك هو مادة الجهل ومنبع فساد العالم. And this is the substance of ignorance. They are in fact, these learned people, ignorant, and it is the wellspring, the reason why scholars are corrupted, because they get into these intricate things for reasons of ostentation, which is because they're ignorant of the purpose of knowledge. والمقصود أن من قصد الخير بمعصية عن جهل. What we mean is that the person who intends something good by committing a sin out of ignorance, فهو غير معذور, has no excuse. Ignorance of the shara is no excuse. إلا إذا كان قريب العهد بالإسلام ولم يجد بعد مهلة للتعلم. Unless the person is new to Islam and hasn't had enough time to learn. And this is the reason given in the books of Shara why certain things are not quite incumbent upon the really new Muslim. So if day after his shahad, he gets up in the morning and he says Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and he eats his egg and bacon for breakfast or something and he says Alhamdulillah after it, he is excused in his ignorance because he just hasn't had time to learn yet. But that doesn't go on. There comes a time when the taklif is the same as it is for other Muslims. وقد قال الله سبحانه فاسألوا أهل الذكر إن كنتم لا تعلمون. Allah has said, ask the people of remembrance, the people of knowledge, the people who recall, the people of the scripture, if you don't know. Commandment. Yeah, and he gets into these amazingly timeless contemporary issues. ويقرب من تقرب السلاطين ببناء المساجد والمدارس بالمال الحرام تقرب العلماء السوء بتعليم العلم للسفهاء والأشرار. Just as some of the sultans, just as some draw near to the sultans by building mosques and madrasas with haram money, some scholars, some evil scholars, draw near by teaching knowledge to ignorant and evil people. المشغولين بالفسق والفجور, who are preoccupied with bad habits and corruptness. They may be Sharia students, but they're doing all kinds of stuff and they shouldn't be studying and they shouldn't be taught. This is something that the Imam must have seen in his life, that some scholars who, in order to maintain a position or to get money from some sultan, are teaching people who really shouldn't be taught. And just to say, because this is sacred knowledge, it's all right, doesn't make it all right. The intention doesn't rectify the sin. So what are they into? Istimalati wujuhin nas. What they really mean by studying is they want to be some big shot mufti or to become the minister of religious affairs or something. Istimalati wujuhin nas, so that people will look at them. Or jam'i hutam ad-dunya, and to get some of the ashes of the dunya for themselves, so they'll get a nice salary, and the minister of awqaf gets a Mercedes, and they're aspirational for that, and this happens. وَأَخْذِ أَمْوَالِ السَّلَاطِينِ وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينَ, and to take the money of the sultans and the orphans and the poor, from the money of the waqf or whoever's giving sadaqah for the students. فَإِنَّ هَؤُلَاءِ إِذَا تَعَلَّمُوا, these people, if they learn, كَانُوا قُطَّاعَ طَرِيقِ اللَّهِ, they are the highwaymen on God's road. وَانْتَهَضَ كُلُّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمْ فِي بَلْدَتِهِ نَائِبًا عَنِ الدَّجَّالِ, and each one of them, when is appointed to a position in his town, is the representative of the Dajjal. يَتَكَالَبُ عَلَى الدُّنْيَا, he is avid for dunya. وَيَتْبَعُ الْهَوَى, and follows his own caprice. وَيَتَبَاعَدُ عَنِ التَّقْوَى, and distances himself from real taqwa. وَيَسْتَجْرِئُ النَّاسِ بِسَبَبِ مُشَاهَدَتِهِ عَلَى مَعَاصِي اللَّهِ, and he shocks people when they see him engaging in acts of disobedience to Allah. ثُمَّ قَدْ يَنْتَشِرُ ذَلِكَ الْعِلْمُ إِلَى مِثْلِهِ وَأَمْثَالِهِ, and then he himself may be a reason for spreading that false knowledge to people like himself. وَيَتَّخِذُونَهُ أَيْضًا آلَةً وَوَسِيلَةً فِي الشَّرِّ وَاتِّبَاعِ الْهَوَى, and these false students, following false teachers, use this insincere, niyyah-less Islam as a means to bring about their own desires. وَيَتَسَلْسَلُ ذَلِكَ, and that produces a kind of chain reaction. وَوَبَالُ جَمِيعِهِ يَرْجِعُ إِلَى الْمُعَلِّمِ الَّذِي عَلَّمَهُ الْعِلْمِ مَعَ عِلْمِهِ بِفَسَادِ نِيَّتِهِ وَقَصْدِهِ. And all of these disasters can be attributed to that first teacher who taught him knowledge, knowing that his intention was bad and his purpose was wrong. This is very important in an institution of religious learning, that the teachers divulge the treasures of the ilm to people who are worthy of carrying it, people who will practice what they preach, people who will be exemplars other than people who just want, I want a job with the government's anti-terrorism agenda, or maybe I'll get a job in the Foreign Office, or maybe I'll get some cushy job as a director of some Islamic whatever. No, that can't be the intention. Dunya, status, all of that. No, you do not teach people if they just want to use religion as something to widen their career options. فيموت هذا العالم وتبقى آثار شره منتشرة في العالم 1000 سنة أو 2000 سنة وطوبى لمن إذا مات ماتت معه ذنوبه. And when such a scholar dies, the effect of his teaching, the evil effect of his teaching, will continue to be spread in the whole world, maybe for 1,000 years or 2,000 years. Blessed is he who, when he dies, finds that his sins die with him. And this is a real form of corruption and a problem in the contemporary ummah, particularly where religion has been governmentalized and also professionalized. In the traditional Islamic world, universally, the ulama taught in independent institutions that were funded by awqaf, and they could teach as they saw right. And if that teaching didn't please the government, or produced imams who spoke in ways that the government found disagreeable, such and such a sultan is not paying attention to the orphans, such and such a sultan should build a new bridge for the city, such and such a sultan, etc. Those khutbahs, if they're real imams, they will be giving those khutbahs because it is part of prophetic religion to rock the boat and not to go along with the convenience of the rich and the powerful. This is the prophetic way. But in the modern system that we see across the Islamic world, you have the adoption of what is ultimately the Christian idea of the state church or the established church. a hierarchy. Here is the local Imam, and here is the regional Mufti, and here is the national Mufti, and here is the Minister of Religious Affairs, and it's all controlled, and you can't do religion outside that church-like hierarchy. This is not the way of Islam, and it's a way of integrating religion into the state, not to make religion the judge of the state, but to make the state the controller of religion. This is hugely subversive, and it's one of the reasons for radicalization now. People say the state must control religion in order to control what's said in the mosques. The reality is, to the extent that the state controls religion, the men of religion are less credible to the young, and the young will look for some other more radical, more dysfunctional, more fundamentalist way of exploring and venting their grievances. And this is a real subversion in the Muslim world, which Imam Ghazali is already telling us about and warning us of those people who teach in that system. It doesn't mean that everybody in those hierarchies and those systems and those state Islamic universities are not authorities or that they're problematic. They're in a difficult situation, and if they aren't there, somebody else, maybe even worse, will take that position. And you can see that there's a reason for that. Now, they have a good argument. If I'm not Minister of Religious Affairs, then they're going to appoint the guy who drinks to be Minister of Religious Affairs. So I'm akhaffu dararain, and I know that I have to read all of the emails that the state security services are telling me every day about what fatwas are what and who I should shake hands with and who I should condemn, and it's horrible. But still, it's better than the other guy. But it's a feature of totalitarian regimes. But it doesn't mean that they're all wicked or corrupt. I remember in the time of the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, religion was nationalized, controlled by the state, really in order to weaken it and to control it until it shriveled away, and the great socialist utopia of plenty would appear. So in the Soviet Union, 95% of the mosques had been demolished. 98% of the ulama had had a bullet put through their heads, or they'd been sent off to the gulag, never to return, and it was real atheism, a total wipeout. But the people who remained, many of them recognized the difficulty of their situation. They were decent people, and they taught in the way that they could, even though the party was always listening. So just because people are in these new state seminaries and hierarchies doesn't mean that we should despise them. And that's not actually what Imam Ghazali is saying here. He's talking about those who voluntarily take on students who are evidently corrupt, who then use religion just as a way of making a career for themselves. And the ulama, to the extent that they can, will always tell those students to go off and study to be politicians or journalists or whatever, but not to be ulama, because the ulama represent Islam. The ulama are the warathatul anbiya, the heirs of the prophets, and really have to represent the credibility, the moral seriousness of religion, rather than just be another megaphone for some amir or some king or some president or some general, which is lethal to the integrity of religion, which is about the proclamation of justice, or it's nothing. But you can see how contemporary and biting are the Imam's trenchant comments here. ثُمَّ الْعَجَبُ مِنْ جَهْلِهِ حَيْثُ يَقُولُ. So if you recall, what he's talking about is the fact that a sin cannot, through some complex intention to do good by it, be turned into a virtue. And a lot of people tend to mess around with this. So they will say, oh, I only go clubbing in order to do da'wah to the girls in the clubs, or this kind of stuff. And it's, you can't turn something that is about nafs and indulgence and drinking and so forth into something good just because you've magically persuaded yourself that you have a different intention and that you're not into that particular practice. So we need to be wary of this when we get near moral boundaries, that we're not deceiving ourselves. ثُمَّ الْعَجَبُ مِنْ جَهْلِهِ حَيْثُ يَقُولُ. And then this person is amazing when he says, actions are by intentions. وَقَدْ قَصَدْتُ بِذَلِكَ نَشْرَ عِلْمِ الدِّينِ. And I intended, by teaching these corrupt students, the spreading of the knowledge of religion. فإن استعمله هو في الفساد, if he uses that thing for some corrupt purpose, فالمعصية منه لا مني, then that's his fault and not mine, it's his sin. وما قصدت به إلا أن يستعين به على الخير. I only intended that he should use this knowledge that I'm giving him, this beautiful sacred knowledge, in order to do good things. وإنما حب الرياسة والاستتباع والتفاخر بعلو العلم يحسن ذلك في قلبه. But such people who make this claim are only find this beautiful in their hearts because of their love of leadership and to have followers and to boast amongst their peers. If they were sincere, there's no way they would be teaching those students. وَالشَّيْطَانُ بِوَاسِطَةِ حُبِّ الرِّيَاسَةِ يُلَبِّسُ عَلَيْهِ. And through human love of status and power causes this confusion within him, this deceit. وَلَيْتَ الشِّعْرِ مَا جَوَابُهُ عَمَّنْ وَهَبَ سَيْفًا مِنْ قَاطِعِ طَرِيقٍ. I don't know what he'd say if somebody gave a sword to a robber. Nowadays we'd say you give a knife to a mugger. وأعد له خيلا وأسبابا يستعين بها على مقصوده, and gives that robber horses and equipment which make it easier for him to prosecute his criminal career. ويقول إنما أردت البذل والسخاء. I just wanted to be generous. والتخلق بأخلاق الله تعالى, and to emulate the qualities of Allah Himself, who is generous. وقصدت به أن يغزو بهذا الصيف والخيل في سبيل الله. And I intended that he should use the sword and these horses for the defense of Islam في سبيل الله. فإن إعداد الخيل والرباط والقوة الغزاة من أفضل القربات, because to prepare people for the defense of Islam is one of the best of actions. فإن هو صرفه إلى قطع الطريق فهو العاصي. But if that robber uses these things in order to steal from people and to hold up carriages at night, he is the sinner. وقد أجمع الفقهاء على أن ذلك حرام. But the fuqaha have agreed unanimously that that is haram. You can't give a knife to a mugger with the prayer or the intention that he'll use it for something good. You have to be real and see the practical, likely outcomes of what you're doing. The intention cannot turn that thing into a virtue. مع أن السخاء هو أحب الأخلاق إلى الله. Even though generosity is the most beloved of human virtues to Allah. حتى قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن لله تعالى 300 خلق من تقرب إليه بواحد منها دخل الجنة وأحبها إليه السخاء. There are Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has 300 characteristics. Whoever draws near to him by emulating one of them shall enter paradise, and the most beloved of them all to him is generosity. So you can fiddle with the scripture and use them to distort what you're doing and to claim that your intention is to do something good, even though clearly the social consequences of what you're doing, in this case, teaching people who are going to abuse religion, is disastrous. But this is unanimously wrong. فَلَيْتَ الشِّعْرِ لِمَا حَرُمَ هَذَا السَّخَاء. So such a person says, why is this generosity forbidden? ولما وجب عليه أن ينظر إلى قرينة الحال في هذا الظالم. But he must look at the circumstances surrounding that oppressor. فإذا لاح له من عادته أنه يستعين بالسلاح على الشر فينبغي أن يسعى في سلب سلاحه لا في أن يمده بغيره. So it's obvious from looking at the circumstances that if such a person is normally given to vice and is likely to use the equipment that you give him for vicious purposes, then it's appropriate for you to take weapons from him, not to give him even more. وَالْعِلْمُ سِلَاحٌ. And knowledge is a weapon. يُقَاتَلُ بِهِ الشَّيْطَانُ وأعداء الله وقد يعاون به أعداء الله تعالى وهو الهوى. So knowledge is a weapon which the shaitan and Allah's enemies can use to fight with. And this is the nature, this is the meaning of hawa, or inclination, personal whim, caprice. فَمَنْ لَا يَزَالُ مُؤْثِرًا لِدُنْيَاهُ عَلَى دِينِهِ, whoever continues to prefer his dunya over his deen, وَلِهَوَاهُ عَلَى آخِرَتِهِ, and his own desires over his next world, وهو عاجز عنها لقلة فضله فكيف يجوز إمداده بنوع علم يتمكن به من الوصول إلى شهواته. So how is it possible, how is it permissible that one could give such a person, such a student, knowledge which he would use in order to obtain his desires? So Imam Ghazali is spending some time on this because this aspect of intention is important, the intention of beginning knowledge. And this is, after all, why Imam al-Bukhari, rahmatullahi alayh, puts the hadith of intention at the beginning of his Sahih. It doesn't seem to belong there because the first chapter is Kitab Bad il-Wahi, the beginning of revelation. But right at the beginning of that, you get actions of our intentions. And human beings have only that which they intended. That is because he's putting it there for the student, to warn the student to rectify his intention, to make sure that he's doing this for the right reason. Otherwise, it's going to be a moral catastrophe. So the beginning of the search for sacred knowledge is to have the right intention, and it's essential that the teacher sees that the student should have the right intention. Otherwise, they're going to be using these powerful weapons. Religion is powerful in the service of their own desires and of shaitan. And this is kind of the end of religion. So we should the stories here about the ulama who, when they saw their students using knowledge for the wrong purposes, would immediately kind of ban them from their lectures. حكي عن بعض أصحاب أحمد بن حنبل, the story of Imam Ahmad رحمه الله تعالى, أنه كان يتردد إليه سنين, that somebody used to visit him for classes for years. ثم اتفق أن أعرض عنه أحمد, and then it turned out that Ahmad bin Hanbal turned away from him, wouldn't admit him to his classes. He was no longer his student. وهجره وصار لا يكلمه, and he boycotted him and no longer spoke to him. فلم يزال يسأله عن تغيره عليه وهو لا يذكره حتى قال له, and he kept asking why he'd changed. He didn't himself mention anything. And then he said, بلغني أنك طينت حائط دارك من جانب الشارع فقد أخذت قدر سمك الطين وهو أنملة من شارع المسلمين فلا تصلح لتعلم العلم. Imam Ahmad explained to him as follows: the reason why you can't be my student in sacred law any longer is that I've heard that you were plastering the front of your house from the direction of the street and in a way that made the street very marginally narrower. Plaster's not going to be thick, but you were taking some of the street and you're taking some of the road of the Muslims, and therefore you're not suitable for learning sacred knowledge. You're enlarging your own territory, even in a small way, at the expense of others, and therefore I don't want to have anything to do with you. And so he's talking here about many of the ulama are in this state, that one should not judge them by their great turbans or their broad sleeves and the complex things that they say, because actions are by intentions. So this is the main topic that is wanted to share with us in the first of these three sections of this bayan, where he is talking about the fact that in the category of sinful actions, it's not possible for a sinful action to become a virtuous action simply because one changes one's intention. And obviously this was a big issue in his time, as it is in ours. Nowadays, in the Muslim world, you tend not to face a very illustrious or prosperous career if you choose the path of sacred knowledge, but nonetheless there are those who go into madrasas and darul ulums for disparate reasons and disparate purposes, and it is the responsibility of the teacher to make sure that the intention of the student is liwajhillah, just for the sake of Allah. Otherwise, with all of this powerful Islamic information, they're going to be carving out some space for them in dunya, even if it's only manipulating others and lording it over others in their jama'ah. This has to be stopped, and those people cannot be admitted because of their intention. So the moral of that section is a bad action cannot become anything other than a bad action simply because the intention is different. So he moves on to the second section, al-qismu thani at-ta'at, acts of obedience. وهي مرتبطة بالنيات في أصل صحتها وفي تضاعف فضلها. These are connected to intention in the basis of their soundness, in other words, whether they're good deeds or not, and also within good deeds, the extent of their meritoriousness reflects the quality and the number of intentions as well. And so this is like the opposite. A bad deed can't become a good deed because of intention, but a good deed can become anything by intention. If you have a bad intention with a good deed, it becomes a bad deed. أما الأصل فهو أن ينوي بها عبادة الله تعالى لا غير. The basis of it is that he should intend by his action the worship of Allah alone. فإن والرياء صارت معصية. If he intends showing off, then it becomes a sin. The action itself is sinful. وأما تضاعف الفضل, as for the increase, the multiplication of merit, فبكثرة النيات الحسنة. This is because it's possible to have a plurality of good intentions. Remember what we were saying last time about intentions usually being composite of different things. As it's very unusual to have a single intention. فإن الطاعة الواحدة يمكن أن ينوي بها خيرات كثيرة. Because it's quite possible to intend many good things from a single good action. فيكون له بكل نية ثواب. And for each of those actions you acquire a reward. إذ كل واحدة منها حسنة. Because each of those things constitutes goodness. ثم تضاعف كل حسنة عشر أمثالها كما ورد به الخبر. So it's as if an action becomes a range of actions by the multiplication of good intentions in it. It becomes a whole bunch of virtues and not just one, even though outwardly it's a single action. And because actions are rewarded tenfold, good actions, not only do you have a multiplication of good actions where outwardly there seems to be just one, because you've got these good intentions, but with each good action it's multiplied tenfold. So this is a kind of logarithmic advantage just through intention. ومثاله القعود في المسجد. You can think of many examples. The one he wants to give us is sitting in the mosque. فإنه طاعة. This is in itself a virtue, an act of obedience. ويمكن أن ينوي فيه نيات كثيرة حتى يصير من فضائل أعمال المتقين ويبلغ به درجات المقربين. But it is possible that one sitting in the mosque could be on the basis of a range of different good intentions to the extent that one reaches the degree of those who are brought near to Allah and becomes really one of the people of taqwa, even though all you're doing apparently is sitting in the masjid. أولها. So let's see how many different intentions he can find for us just for sitting down in the mosque. أن يعتقد أنه بيت الله. The belief that it's Allah's house. وأن داخله زائر لله. And that the one who enters it is visiting Allah. فيقصد به زيارة مولاه رجاء لما وعده به رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم حيث قال: من قعد في المسجد فقد زار الله تعالى وحق على المزور إكرام زائره. So he intends to visit his Lord in the hope of receiving that which the Holy Prophet promises in the hadith: whoever sits in the mosque has visited Allah Ta'ala, and it is incumbent upon the one who is visited to honor his visitor. That's the first intention. Go to Allah's house. وثانيها, the second of these intentions, أن ينتظر الصلاة بعد الصلاة, is waiting for a prayer after another prayer, because this is also an important virtue. The Holy Prophet says in a very famous hadith: إسباغ الوضوء على المكاره كثرة الخطى إلى المساجد وانتظار الصلاة بعد الصلاة فذلكم الرباط. The things that are considered to be a fortress are pouring out the wudu water when it's difficult. You're traveling and it's hard to find water, but you find it, or the water is really cold. Many footsteps towards the mosque. And also waiting for a prayer after having completed the previous prayer, which is another of the virtues of the people of the masajid. Of course, in England in the winter it's not so difficult. It might be just an hour's wait. In the summer it's an achievement. But this is the meaning of warabitu in this sense. Take the mosque as a fortress by waiting for the prayer after the previous prayer. So after Jummah, perhaps, you might wait to pray Asr, and people will do this. After the Taraweeh in Ramadan, if the nights are short, you might just want to wait until Fajr, and this is another of the virtues of just sitting in the mosque. وثالثها, the third, الترحب بكف السمع والبصر والأعضاء عن الحركات والترددات. The third of our intentions is to be kind of monkish or detached in protecting the hearing and the eye and the limbs from movements and fidgeting. فإن الاعتكاف كف, because making i'tikaf, stopping religiously in the mosque, is a form of abstention. وهو في معنى الصوم, it's conceptually akin to fasting. وهو نوع الترهب, it's a kind of monasticism. So this is, as the saying goes, رهبانية أمتي القعود في المساجد. The monasticism of my ummah is sitting in the mosques. In the mosque you're kind of detached from those distractions, and that in itself, having that intention as one of your intentions, is something that's going to raise your spiritual degree. ورابعها, so he's found a fourth one here. The fourth intention, عقوف الهم على الله, to focus your concerns on Allah alone. ولزوم السر للفكر في الآخرة, and to take this as an opportunity to be mindful, as it were, and to think about the next world. ودفع الشواغل الصارفة عنه بالاعتزال إلى المسجد, and to be protected from the various distractions that might occur to you were you not to be sitting in this state of withdrawal in the mosque. وخامسها التجرد لذكر الله أو لاستماع ذكره وللتذكير به. The fifth intention is to be there to remember Allah, or to listen to the remembrance of Allah. Maybe somebody's reading Quran, or possibly your intention in the mosque can be to be an instructor to others, or to read Quran, or to help others in some way. وسادسها, number 6 now, أن يقصد إفادة علم بأمر معروف ونهي عن منكر, to intend to serve knowledge about commanding the good and forbidding the evil. إذ المسجد لا يخلو عمن يسيء صلاته أو يتعاطى ما لا يحل له فيأمره بمعروف ويرشده إلى الدين. Because every mosque contains some people who are making mistakes, who are getting something wrong, whose prayer is not right, or who've been doing something that is not permissible. Maybe somebody comes into the mosque and has been drinking or some other thing. And this is an opportunity for you to put things right. But of course, you must recall in all of this that Amr bil Ma'ruf has to be done with adab. Nothing is worse in our decadent modern circumstances than the sight of the youth who is sitting around just looking for somebody to make a mistake, and in his self-righteousness and his misunderstanding of the idea of Amr bil Ma'ruf, he immediately, happily goes up to that person and says, "Brother, the prayer is not like this. Brother, you should not do this. Brother, your thobe is too long. Brother, your thobe is too short," whatever it is. Really pleased with himself. Outwardly, he's done something good, but the danger is that he will cause offence, and that person, who may even be new to Islam, may not come to the mosque again. So this is really important, and Imam al-Ghazali talks about this in the Kitab al-Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar in the Ihya, that it has to be done with adab in a way that will actually genuinely increase somebody's love for religion, and to do things harshly and judgmentally, especially nowadays, is really a disastrous idea. I remember before I was Muslim, I was beginning to study Arabic and went for 3 weeks to Cairo and visited the mosques and not really understanding or knowing anything, taking photographs, sitting around, probably sitting in the wrong way. I didn't know. And I would do drawings. Sat in the mosque of Imam al-Shafi'i, no less, doing drawings of what was going on, and the arches and so forth. And what I recall now is that although those were busy places, and there was some weird, long-haired teenage tourist doing drawings in the mosque, nobody was ever angry, but instead, because they could see that maybe somebody who's interested in Islam, everything was courteous, and they looked at the pictures, and they never said anything in those 3 weeks of my ignorance that hurt me or repelled me. But unfortunately, some people do visit the mosques of the world of Islam, and they're put off by people who are just kind of hostile or scornful, and this is a catastrophe. They are not even new Muslims yet, and so they're certainly to be excused for their ignorance. So Imam al-Ghazali is saying that you can do this, but another aspect of this is, of course, that if you're in the mosque, it can help with mosque security. Nowadays, when opponents, hostile people, vandals, skinheads of various kinds can break into mosques and smash them up, it's just good to have Muslims around in the mosque, just keeping an eye on things, and this is another good niyyah to have when sitting in the mosque. But it's not finished yet. سابعها, the 7th benefit of going to the mosque, أن يستفيد أخا في الله تعالى, is that you might find a new friend, a brother in Allah. فإن ذلك غنيمة وذخيرة للدار الآخرة, because that is a great benefit and a useful treasure for your journey to the next world. والمسجد مؤشش أهل الدين المحبين لله وفي الله. And the mosque is the nest of the people of religion who love Allah and who love each other for the sake of Allah. So your socializing, to the extent that you're in the mosque, is likely to be a good socializing if you're with people who are attracted to that pure place. وَثَامِنُهَا, the 8th intention that we can have to multiply our intentions for sitting around in the mosque, أَنْ يَتْرُكَ الذُّنُوبَ حَيَاءً مِنَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى وحياء من أن يتعاطى في بيت الله ما يقتضي هتك الحرمة, is that it is an opportunity to leave sins out of shyness, modesty and shame before Allah, shame that one should be committing sins in Allah's house. So in the mosque, you're less likely to be looking at the other gender, you're less likely to be fiddling around with goodness knows what on the internet, because the mosque brings a certain dignity and a certain hayat to you, and this is beneficial, and we should go to the mosque in order to receive that protection and that 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 shield. وقد قال الحسن بن علي رضي الله عنهما, Imam al-Hasan, second Imam, said, من أدمن الاختلاف إلى المسجد رزقه الله إحدى سبع خصال. Whoever makes it his constant habit to visit the mosques, Allah will give him one of 7 qualities or 7 gifts. أخا مستفادا في الله, a precious brother who helps him in the sake of the cause of Allah. أو رحمة مستنزلة, or Allah will give him some unexpected mercy. أو علما مستطرفا, or some useful and uplifting knowledge. أو كلمة تدل على هدى, or he will hear some word which guides him towards guidance. أو تصرفه عن ردى, or that will protect him from destruction. أو يترك الذنوب خشية أو حياء, or he will renounce sins out of fear or out of shame and modesty. And unfortunately, in our times, people often do not switch off their mobile phones when they visit the mosque, and even during khutbahs you can see people scrolling and looking at things, and this is really a catastrophe, even if they're looking at things that aren't in themselves, haram, news of the celebrities and so forth. You're not going to look at that, inshallah, during the khutbah. Inshallah, there's a certain hayat, a certain protection that the mosque gives us. So here's the 8th intention that we can have when we go just to visit the mosque. فهذا طريق تكثير النيات. So he says, concluding these 8, this is the way by which the niyas are multiplied. وقس به سائر الطاعات والمباحات, and use this by analogy to think about the other legitimate and good things that you do. Try and multiply your good intentions in them. إذ ما من طاعة إلا وتحتمل نيات كثيرة, because there's no act of obedience to God that is not potentially susceptible to many intentions. وإنما تحضر في قلب العبد المؤمن بقدر جده في طلب الخير. But they're only present in the heart of the believer to the extent that he is serious in seeking goodness. وتشمر له, and is rolling up his sleeves to work for this goodness. وتفكره فيه, and remind him of it. فبهذا تزكو الأعمال وتتضاعف الحسنات. Okay, so that's what he wants to say about the way in which intention really affects virtues. That a virtue can become something haram if there is a bad intention behind it, or it can be very limited in its benefit, but it can also be massively multiplied. And this is another reason why ilm is useful. You attend a lecture on the mental health benefits of worship, for instance. And from that time on, maybe in your 1,820 prayers a year, or whatever it is you're doing, you have that additional niyyah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes me to be a dignified and a balanced human being, inwardly and outwardly healthy. This act, as well as its other wonderful consequences, is going to help me to be a more balanced person inwardly, and so that intention will carry you through. So ilm, is something that helps this logarithmic multiplication of the good intentions and the good consequences. So we should close this chapter now by looking at the last qism. He's dealt with sins, he's dealt with virtues, and now al-mubahat. The third is mubahat, things that are in themselves neutral. Shall I catch the train to work, or shall I take the bus? Sharia, Quran, Sunnah, so forth is not going to be tremendously exercised by things like that. وَمَا مِنْ شَيْءٍ مِنَ الْمُبَاحَاتِ إِلَّا وَيَحْتَمِلُ نِيَّةً أَوْ نِيَّاتٍ يَصِيرُ بِهَا مِنْ مَحَاسِنِ الْقُرُبَاتِ. He says there's not a single neutral thing, permissible thing, that cannot be given an intention or many intentions by which it becomes one of the beautiful acts of drawing close to Allah. وَيُنَالُ بِهَا مَعَالِي الدَّرَجَاتِ, by which high degrees can be attained. فَمَا أَعْظَمَ خُسْرَانَ مَنْ يَغْفُلُ عَنْهَا. So he's really a loser, the one who is simply ignorant and heedless of these things and is just doing things in a kind of neutral way and doesn't turn them into virtues. ويتعاطاها تعاطي البهائم المهملة عن سهو وغفلة. And simply uses these permissible things, these neutral things, just as animals would, without really being conscious or seeing that they can be turned to good purpose. And this is part of sleepiness, heedlessness, the ghafla, the kind of comatose state through which we pass so much of our days, rather than seeing that the legitimate things that I'm doing that are not haram, but are in themselves acts of worship, I can uplift through making an intention, through realizing how that thing is part of Allah's creation. I can consider what He has made in that thing and what I'm doing with this moment. There's always, in every moment in the believer's life, a way of ennobling that moment. And that's part of the gift of faith, that one is never just left alone. One is always morally and spiritually active, called upon to be active. So, the Imam says, ولا ينبغي أن يستحقر العبد شيئا من الخطرات والخطوات واللحظات. It's not right for Allah's servant to despise any passing notion or footstep that he takes, or any glance. فكل ذلك يسأل عنه يوم القيامة أنه لما فعله. Because all of that, he can be asked, will be asked on the Day of Judgment, why did he do that thing? وما الذي قصد به? What did he mean by that thing? وهذا في مباح محض لا يشبه كراهة. And this is even in things that are absolutely neutral and which are not touched by any kind of disapproved status. ولذلك قال صلى الله عليه وسلم حلالها حساب وحرامها عذاب. In the famous saying, he says, that which is halal in the things of the world will be called to account, and that which is haram will be punished. So it's about the richness of the life of faith, and about avoiding the flatness of the life of those who don't really see meaning in anything, which includes a lot of religious people who are practicing by rote, people who've learnt religion from their mothers in the kitchen and perhaps from an occasional khutbah and are just going through the motions, and for whom most things in life, driving their taxi, running their companies, being professors, is just a way of making an income, and they don't really sacralize those moments. But the Islamic way is to recognize the divine presence and the divine scrutiny and the divine judgment in every moment, and hence the believer's life is incredibly rich. Everything is, at least potentially, full of significance, full of beauty, full of hope, full of fear. The believer, even if he lives only 20 years, has a richer and deeper life than the unbeliever who lives to be 100. It's just qualitatively a different way of being. وفي حديث معاذ بن جبل أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إن العبد لا يسأل يوم القيامة عن كل شيء حتى عن كحل عينيه وعن فئات الطينة بإصبعيه وعن لمسه ثوب أخيه. A human being will be asked on the Day of Judgment about everything, even about the kohl that he applied to his eyes, and about the little pieces, fatat at-tinati bi asabi'i, the little pieces of clay which he molded with his fingers, and about the way in which he touched somebody else's garment. All of that is significant. Well, Allah has given us the moments and the capacity, the qudra, to do those things in a universe, every moment of which is amazing. And so many of the shuyukh will say, actually every moment in creation is equivalently amazing. We tend to get bored and jaded a lot nowadays, and we wait for extreme events. I'm going to run a marathon, I'm going to do bungee jumping, I'm going to whatever, because everything seems kind of flat in this way that here we're being asked to avoid and transcend. And a lot of things are kind of routine and boring. A lot of people suffer anxiety, depression, just because of the repetitive and the meaningless nature of a lot of modern jobs. And so entertainment always seems to become more extreme. The fashions, the celebrities, the politicians, everything gets more and more edgy and extreme because people are bored. But if everything is amazing as it has to be, because Allah is creating it and doing something unique always, كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ, then you don't need to wait to be uplifted and to be jolted out of your grey despond by some amazing event or some staggering relationship or some meaningful something that you're waiting for. Every moment is amazing. Shaykh Abdal al-Jamal, one of the great English shuyukh, used to say, every moment is equivalently amazing. And the life of faith is a life of maximizing your opportunities for seeing that. Sometimes we don't see things as being amazing. We're sitting at home, stroking the cat, listening to something. Why is it amazing? It is amazing because of the unlikeliness of creation, because of the unique disposition of creation in that moment, because of the improbability of it all. Everything is sign. So every moment we work towards in our life of Iman, as we increase our Iman, to see more and more of it as amazing. So this is of the mubahat, the ordinary things. There are no ordinary things really for the believer, and everything can be turned into something that's spiritually luminous and transformative, and a ta'ah, an act of obedience. وفي خبر آخر من تطيب لله تعالى, whoever puts on perfume for the sake of Allah, جاء يوم القيامة وريحه أطيب من المسك, will come on the day of judgment and his perfume will be sweeter than musk. ومن تطيب لغير الله تعالى, whoever puts on a perfume for some other reason, جاء يوم القيامة وريحه أنتن من الجيفة, on the day of judgment he will come and he will smell worse than a corpse. فاستعمال الطيب مباح, to use perfume is just a permissible thing. ولكن لا بد فيه من نية, but there must be a niyyah. So what is the meaning of the niyyah? And here he starts his analysis, breaking this down. How is it that an ordinary thing, like I'm using aftershave today, who cares spiritually, religiously, how can this become something that lifts us or lowers us? فإن قلت, were you to say, فما الذي يمكن أن ينوى بالطيب وهو حظ من حظوظ النفس, what intention could one possibly have in using perfume when it's just something that the self finds pleasing? وكيف يتطيب لله, how can one put on perfume for God? فاعلم, know, أن من يتطيب مثلا يوم الجمعة وفي سائر الأوقات يتصور أن يقصد التنعم باللذات الدنيا. Know that somebody who, for instance, puts on perfume on Friday or on some other time might possibly just be intending to enjoy one of the pleasurable experiences of the world. أو يقصد به إظهار التفاخر بكثرة المال, or might want to show off the wealth that he has, so that others might envy him. Like that nonsense experience that we have to, the gauntlet that we run when we go through the airport, and even though you're about to miss the flight and it's closing and you've got 2 minutes left, you have to go through the perfume and the duty free and the kind of wiggly path, and it's, why is all of that stuff there and why are billions being made out of it? It's not just because one smell is marginally slightly chemically different than another, it's because of pride. Oh, you're wearing Lancôme today, I have Givenchy and I'm from this class, and it's all kind of, you know, like dogs sniffing each other, really. It's, you know, pecking order stuff. So that can be the intention. Just to show, oh, I have the latest Chanel, you know. I saw the Queen last week, you know. This is Bani Adam. أو يقصد به رياء الخلق ليقوم له الجاه في قلوبهم, or might want to show off to people so that his status in their eyes will increase. ويذكر بطيب الرائحة, and should be mentioned, oh, so-and-so was wearing this perfume. أو ليتودد به إلى قلوب النساء الأجنبيات, or he might be doing it in order to attract strange women. إذا كان مستحلا للنظر إليهم, if he's, you know, somebody who goes and looks at them, maybe that's his intention in wearing perfume. ولأمور أخر لا تحصى, there can be any number of other intentions that he has. وكل هذا يجعل التطيب معصية, and all of this makes his putting on of perfume sinful. فبذلك يكون أنتن من الجيفة يوم القيامة, which is why it said that he's going to stink worse than carrion on the day of judgment. إلا القصد الأول, except for the first intention, وهو التلذذ والتنعم, just to experience pleasure in it, فإن ذلك ليس بمعصية, because that's not a sin. إلا أنه يسأل عنه, he will be asked about it. It's money that he spent, but if he does it just because he likes the fragrance, that's not considered to be a sin. So this is not some kind of monastic penitential model. Right, so bad intentions for putting on the aftershave in the morning. أما النيات الحسنة, as for the good intentions, فأن ينوي به اتباع سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يوم الجمعة. He might intend to follow the sunnah of Allah's Messenger on Friday. وأن ينوي بذلك أيضا تعظيم المسجد, and he may intend similarly to honor the mosque. واحترام بيت الله تعالى, and to respect Allah's house. فلا يرى أن يدخله زائر الله إلا طيب الرائحة. It's not right that Allah's visitor should enter upon his presence unless he's smelling good. وأن يقصد به ترويح جيرانه ليستريحوا في المسجد عند مجاورته بروائحه. And he may intend also to bring happiness or rest to his neighbors when he's sitting next to them in the mosque. وأن يقصد به دفع الروائح الكريهة عن نفسه التي تؤدي إلى إيذاء مخالطيه. He may also have the intention of disguising any unpleasant smells that he might be producing, disguising them from himself, or also protecting neighbors from, if he has bad body odor and he puts on perfume and he does it to protect people, then that's a good intention. وأن يقصد حسم باب الغيبة عن المغتابين إذا اغتابوه بروائح الكريهة. So he can spare people the sin of backbiting. Such and such is a very smelly person, isn't he? He's going to spare them the committing of that sin by veiling the smell with perfume. You have to remember, in the Middle East traditionally, the days were hot and they didn't have convenient showers and baths the way we do. And sometimes people did smell a little high. So perfume, going to the mosque on a hot day, definitely a good niyyah is there. Right, so he's given us this list of bad intentions and good intentions that can transform a neutral act and turn it either into a sin or into a virtuous deed. And this is actually one of the sunnahs that are being neglected. I think it's a beautiful thing to attend Jummah when lots of people are using not cheap but good perfume. It really does change the air and changes the whole spiritual presence of the place, and it's a sunnah that is a strong sunnah for Jummah and something that we need to revive. فهذا وأمثاله من النيات لا يعجز الفقيه عنها إذا كانت تجارة الآخرة وطلب الخير غالبا على قلبه. So these and similar intentions will certainly not be beyond the capacity of the learned person to understand if his concern, his dominant concern in his heart is to create a store for himself in the akhirah and to seek goodness. وَإِذَا لَمْ يَغْلِبْ عَلَى قَلْبِهِ إِلَّا نَعِيمَ الدُّنْيَا, and if only the pleasure of this world is the dominant theme in his heart, لَمْ تَحْضُرْهُ هَذِهِ النِّيَّاتِ, these intentions won't really occur to him. وَإِنْ ذُكِرَتْ لَهُ لَمْ يَنْبَعِثْ لَهَا قَلْبُهُ, and if these good intentions are mentioned to such a person, then they won't really rise up in his heart and be something real. فَلَا يَكُونُ مَعَهُ مِنْهَا إِلَّا حَدِيثُ النَّفْسِ, it'll just be a kind of stream of consciousness in his soul. Oh, I've heard that it's good to use perfume and to have these good niyyahs, and yes, I've heard that, and it's maybe on his mind somewhere, but it isn't part of his niyyah. وَلَيْسَ ذَلِكَ مِنَ النِّيَّةِ فِي شَيْءٍ. It's nothing to do with niyyah for him just to be hearing about these things and to be maybe even repeating them. وَالْمُبَاحَاتُ كَثِيرَةٌ. There are very many neutral or permissible matters. لا يمكن إحصاء النية فيها. We can't possibly list all of the intentions with regard to them. فقس بهذا الواحد ما عداه. But use this example, the one about the perfume, and use it as a kind of basis for analogy for other things. فلهذا قال بعض العارفين من السلف إني لأستحب أن يكون لي في كل شيء نية حتى في أكلي وشربي ونومي ودخولي إلى الخلاء. One of the early Muslims used to say, I love having an intention in everything I do, even when I eat and drink and sleep, even when I go to the bathroom. Because the intention, when you think about it, is what in a sense brings us to life and makes us mindful and attentive human beings and takes us out of this kind of autopilot state that we're often in. When you think about why am I doing this, not only are you a more morally significant human being, but you are a more reflective and alive human being. And the modern world, unfortunately, tends to anesthetize us, whereas a traditional life, partly because of its discomforts and the presence of death, but also because of its spiritual disciplines and its the tremendous gravity which it attaches to doing things for a moral reason, and because of the reality of the afterlife, does tend to produce human beings who are more alert and more alive. And that's why the adab of traditional people is often so beautiful, because every moment for them is something that could be an artwork that they wish to cultivate and to experience, grab the moment to the full. وَكُلُّ ذَلِكَ مِمَّا يُمْكِنُ أَنْ يُقْصَدَ بِهِ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. All of these are things by which one can make the intention of only pleasing Allah. لأن كل ما هو سبب لبقاء البدن, because everything which brings about the health of the body, وفراغ القلب من مهمات البدن, and keeping the mind from worrying about the needs of the body, فهو معين على الدين, is something that helps religion as well. فمن قصده من الأكل التقوي على العبادة, so whoever in eating intends that this will make him stronger and better able to obey God and to worship. ومن الوقاع تحسين دينه وتطيب قلب أهله, and whoever intends when making love to keep chaste and to make his wife happy, والتوصل به إلى ولد صالح يعبد الله تعالى بعده, and inshallah to be granted a righteous child who will worship God when he is gone. فتكثر به أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم, so that the ummah of Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم could multiply. كان مطيعا بأكله ونكاحه, he is engaged in an act of virtue and obedience in his eating and in his sleeping with his wife. وأغلب حظوظ النفس الأكل والوقاع, and actually the majority of the ego's concerns and inclinations are to do with eating and physical desire. وقصد الخير بهما غير ممتنع, and it's not impossible to intend by those two things to do good with them. لمن غلب على قلبه هم الآخرة, for whoever finds that concern for the akhirah is the dominant force in his heart. ولذلك ينبغي أن يحسن نيته مهما ضاع له مال. And similarly, it's appropriate for him to consider and improve his intention when he loses something. If you lose money, the house has been broken into, credit card's been stolen, that kind of situation. ويقول هو في سبيل الله, it's in Allah's path. I make this in Allah's path. فإذا بلغه اغتياب غيره له, and when he hears that somebody else has been speaking badly of him, guilty of backbiting, فليطيب قلبه بأنه سيحمل سيئاته وستنقل إلى ديوان حسناته. Let him rejoice his heart with the thought that that person will carry some of his evil deeds, and some of that person's good deeds will be taken to oneself, because this is the consequence of backbiting. وَلْيَنْوِ ذَلِكَ بِسُكُوتِهِ عَنِ الْجَوَابِ, And let this intention be the reason why he doesn't answer. You know, somebody was talking about you and they said that you did this and they saw you doing that, etc., etc., etc. Or I saw you, or this kind of slander, backbiting, criticism of others, which is so common. If you think Allah will, inshallah, accept this misfortune that's come to me as a virtue, then inshallah I will be rewarded for it in the akhirah, then that should be sufficient, and one doesn't really need to defend oneself or argue about it in any egotistic way. Of course, you can refute such things. I didn't do that. That's your haqq. But it can also be a way of just kind of not worrying about it and not letting it get to you, because you remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the ultimate judge and that everything will be requited. So if you have that niyyah, that can really help you to deal with difficult people who are having a go at you. Wabil jumla. So finally, فإياك ثم إياك أن تستحقر شيئا من حركاتك فلا تحترز من غرورها وشرورها. So beware, and then beware of belittling any movement that you make, lest you not protect yourself from the dangers and the risks that could be in that movement. فلا تجد لها جوابا يوم السؤال والحساب, in such a way as if you don't get those movements right, you won't find an answer when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks you about them. فإن الله تعالى مطلع عليك وشهيد. Allah is watching you and is witnessing what you do. وما يلفظ من قول إلا لديه رقيب عتيد. Never does man utter anything but that there is with him a watcher who is ready. So this again is about the sort of remarkable intensification of the believer's life and the centrality of ethics, the fact that in every situation there is a rightness and a wrongness, however mundane that situation might appear to be. وصلى رجل مع الثوري. A man once prayed with Imam Sufyan al-Thawri. فرآه مقلوب الثوب, and saw that he'd put his shirt on inside out. فعرفه, he told him. فمد يده ليصلحه, so he put his hand out in order to put it right again. ثم قبضها, but the Imam took his hand. ولم يسوي, the Imam didn't rectify the way his shirt was. So the man سأله عن ذلك, he asked him why he didn't want to put his shirt the right way round again. فقال إني لبسته لله تعالى, I put it on with the intention of pleasing Allah. ولا أريد أن أسويه لغير الله, and I don't want to put it right again for some reason other than Allah, because you want me to do that. So that's not as good an intention as I think I had when I was putting it on in the first place. So I'm happy to go for the rest of the day wearing the shirt that's inside out. So this is the kind of scrupulousness that these people had, and the value that they attached to making intentions, even for apparently mundane and even trivial things. فانظر لنفسك الآن. So look at yourself now. ودقق الحساب على نفسك قبل أن يدقق عليك. And look scrupulously at your own self and reckon it before you yourself are scrupulously looked at and called to account. وراقب أحوالك. Be vigilant about your states. ولا تسكن ولا تتحرك ما لم تتأمل أولا أنك لما تتحرك. And look at your movements and your times of stillness and ask yourself always and reflect, why am I moving? وماذا تقصد? What do I intend? وما الذي تنال به من الدنيا? What is this worldly thing that this moment is for? وما الذي يفوتك به من الآخرة? And what might you miss in the akhirah through doing this thing? وبماذا ترجح الدنيا على الآخرة? Why are you preferring this world to the next? وَإِذَا عَلِمْتَ أَنَّكَ لَا بَاعِثَ إِلَّا الدِّينِ. If you know that in that moment in what you're doing, it's just a religious purpose, فَمْضِ عَزْمَكَ وَمَا خَطَرَ بِبَالِكَ. Then put your intention into practice and whatever has come into your mind. وَإِلَّا فَأَمْسِكْ. If not, stop. ثُمَّ رَاقِبْ أَيْضًا قَلْبَكَ فِي إِمْسَاكِكَ وَامْتِنَاعِكَ. And then watch your heart also when you are holding back and not doing it. فَإِنَّ تَرْكَ الْفِعْلِ فِعْلٌ. Because not to act is itself an action. وَلَا بُدَّ لَهُ مِنْ نِيَّةٍ صَحِيحَةٍ. And it also requires a sound intention. فَلَا يَنْبَغِي أَنْ يَكُونَ لِدَاعِيَ هَوَى خَفِيٌّ لَا يُطَّلِعَ عَلَيْهِ. And it is not appropriate that your action should be the consequence of some internal inclination which you haven't understood. So scrutinizing intention is a part of self-knowledge. And what the Imam is saying here is that because this is a constant activity, we should automatically be aware of what we're doing and considering the moral and the spiritual significance of what we're doing and making our lives beautiful, that we become alert and alive. وَلَا يَغُرَّنَّكَ زَوَاهِرُ الْأُمُورِ. Don't be distracted by the outward form of things. وَمَشْهُورَاتِ الْخَيْرَاتِ. And the famous things about certain things that are good. وَفْطَنْ لِلْأَغْوَارِ وَالْأَسْرَارِ. Be alert to the secret and the hidden things. تَخَرَّجْ مِنْ حَيِّزِ أَهْلِ الْإِغْتِرَارِ. Because by this you will escape from the prison of the people who are distracted. فَقَدْ رُوِيَ عَنْ زَكَرِيَّا عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ. It's narrated of Zakaria, upon him be peace, أنه كان يعمل في حائط بالطين. He used to work in a small field, a farm, with clay, making the bricks. وكان أجيرا لقوم. And he was hired by people. فقدموا له رغيفين. They would give him 2 loaves of bread. إذ كان لا يأكل إلا من كسب يده. Because it was his practice only to eat from what he himself had earned. فدخل عليه قوم. Some people came to see him. فلم يدعهم إلى الطعام حتى فرغ. And he didn't invite them to the food that he was eating until he finished eating it. فتعجبوا منه لما علموا من سخائه وزهده. They were amazed. Finishes his lunch, but he's known to be generous and not concerned with dunya. وظنوا أن الخير في طلب المساعدة في الطعام. And they thought that goodness in that situation would be to offer the food. فقال إني أعمل لقوم بالأجرة. And he said, I'm working for people for a wage. وقدموا إلي الرغيفين لأتقوى بهما على عملهم. And they give me these 2 loaves of bread so that I might have the strength to perform my duties towards them. فلو أكلتم معي, if you'd taken some of this, لم يكفكم ولم يكفني. It wouldn't be enough for you and it wouldn't be enough for me. وضعفت عن عملهم. And I would not be able to discharge the work that I had undertaken for them. فالبصير هكذا ينظر إلى البواطن بنور الله. So the really perspicuous person thus looks at the inward aspect of things with Allah's light. فإن ضعفه عن العمل نقص في فرض. Because in this case, his inadequate performing of his work would be an inadequacy in performing his obligation. وترك الدعوة إلى الطعام نقص في فضل. But his not inviting them to share his meal would have been a defect in something meritorious but not obligatory. ولا حكم للفضائل مع الفرائض. And you can't compare merits to obligations. So he didn't share his meal. Very surprising story, but you can see the point. His obligation was to his employer. He needed to put the fard before the fadl. فهكذا ينبغي, this is the end of the chapter now, فهكذا ينبغي أن يتفقد العبد نيته في سائر الأعمال. Thus it's essential that Allah's servant inspects his intention in all his acts. فلا يقدم ولا يحجم إلا بنية. So he doesn't approach any act or withhold himself from any act except with an intention. فإن لم تحضره النية توقف. If there doesn't seem to be an intention, he just stops. فإن النية لا تدخل تحت الاختيار. Because intention is not subject to choice. And we have to end the section here. We're out of time, but here he's pointing us towards bayan number 5, the final section in the book of intention, before he goes on to ikhlas and sidq. بيان أن النية غير داخلة تحت الاختيار. An exposition of the fact that intention is not subject to volition. We can't choose our intentions, which seems strange. Don't I intend this and I've decided to intend that? No, he's saying intention is something beneath the surface of our consciousness. You can change the circumstances that generate your intentions, but you can't change your own intentions. So with that rather tantalizing cliffhanger, he leaves us, and inshallah next time we'll be getting into this very remarkable and counterintuitive fact about ourselves. But inshallah we've learned things about our inner life and about how our inner life is massively enriched by the religious life and the spiritual life, for the sake of Allah, for the sake of something beautiful. And the consequence of all of this is, of course, we come closer and closer to the adab of the Sharia and of the Holy Prophet and to the beauty of the Sunnah. It's all compliance with the way of the Chosen One, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq in emulating the Sunnah of the Chosen One inwardly and outwardly, insha'Allah, and grant us His presence and His intercession in the next world, insha'Allah. Innahu ala dhalika laqadir wa bil ijabati jadir. Barakallahu fikum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.